So my name is Brindan Suresh. I am a partner from McKinsey and Company. I am part of our life sciences practice, and I work with pharmaceutical organizations mainly, increasingly on topics like that are R&D related. I do that against the background of having been a physician before I joined McKinsey, and I'm now based in our London office, and I'll be moderating what's being called the Education Gap panel this afternoon.
I'm John Mumm. I spoke with you guys a bit earlier. I'm a scientist. I'm currently at Medi. I had the privilege of finding a molecule while I was doing my PhD work that actually 10,000 publications literally suggested was a suppressor of the immune system. And I found that it actually activates a particular component of the immune system to destroy tumors. I then spent 17 years convincing the rest of the world that that was in fact a good idea, and most recently left my company that I founded, not because the science wasn't good, but because the leadership team had some particular dysfunction with regard to monetizing the asset appropriately. So I think with regard to education and the fact that I worked full-time through all of my education, kind of is a useful kind of counterpoint to maybe some of the other opinions that we have here today.
My name is Peter Espenshade, and I'm from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And at Hopkins, I wear a number of hats. So I'm a professor in the cell biology department. I have a research lab that studies how pancreatic cancer cells sense the oxygen around them with the goal of identifying inhibitory pathways. I'm also the associate dean for graduate students, so I oversee the PhD programs and our 750 PhD students at the School of Medicine. And I'm also the founder of the Center for Innovation in Graduate Biomedical Education, or SIGBE, which strives to do experiments and try to motivate us toward change in graduate education.
Perfect. Thank you. Daniel.
My name is Dan Roche. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'd say I'm 7 and 5, with a couple yet to be determined. My first company that I started was Rapid Systems Solutions. My studies were in computer science, software engineering, and my first company, Rapid, we developed back then. Software development was a big convoluted process, and we used rapid application development techniques to build software faster. In 5 years, I was able to sell that business for $40 million. And then after that, I've been involved in a couple of internet software companies that I've started and run, a healthcare company, a broadband company. And that's kind of what I like to do. I like to look at ideas and help build businesses around them. I find myself doing that a little bit now up at Johns Hopkins as well, with the Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures organization.
My name is Brian Pollack. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Propagenix. It's a cell-based platform technology company based in Rockville, Maryland. It's actually a Georgetown University spin-out. And Propagenix is my 5th startup that I've done. I'm actually, 4 previous ones, 2 for 2, 2 failures, 2 successes. And but I've also had an academic career. I was a tenure track professor at Wake Forest University in North Carolina. I worked for Pfizer for a number of years, learned the drug discovery trade, and then did a startup called Aurora Biosciences, which was acquired by Vertex Pharmaceuticals, and that's where the cystic fibrosis therapeutics came out of that particular site in San Diego. So I spent time both on West Coast, East Coast, Midwest in Madison, Wisconsin for a number of years, Alabama, really all over the nation. So pleasure to be here today.
Thank you.
I'm Brooks Holtom. I'm a professor of management here at Georgetown University. I'm chair of the management department, and I teach classes in leadership, so I may also bring a slightly different perspective. Let me say welcome to the McDonough School, and particularly to the Hariri Building.
Tremendous. Thank you. I think we have 5 exceptional panelists, and I think you're going to hear more from them, obviously, in a minute. But one of the things I wanted to say, I was sitting up the back while Matthias was speaking, was there were a lot of hands that went up, and then it was 2 o'clock and we couldn't sort of continue that part of the discussion. But what we're going to do actually is continue it now. So if you didn't get to ask a question, please ask it. What we're going to do as well is we're going to have a bit of a conversation down the front, but during that, please raise your hand if there's something that's sort of top of your mind. Do it. And then at the end, we're going to just pause actually and open it up to questions. So we want to make this as much of a discussion as we can, as interactive as we can have it be, rather than just the six of us having our own sort of private chat down here and you just watching. That's not the intention, quite the opposite. So I'm going to start with a relatively basic question for our panel, which is, what do you think are some common traits that people must have in order to succeed in academia or industry? So just a basic one, and I might start with Brooks.
Well, there's research to inform this question, gratefully. And what we know in terms of future performance is past performance in the same field is the best predictor of future performance. So when you're thinking about bringing people into a team, you want to look at their track record. Well, what is it that helps establish that? Baseline intelligence is the first predictor, right? So IQ or some measure of that. And second is what's known as conscientiousness. It's a personality trait that is kind of stick-to-itiveness. Take a task and see it to completion. Those are the two best predictors across a range of possibilities in terms of predicting future performance.
Okay. Others, maybe John or Peter?
This actually seemed kind of counterintuitive, right? Because sometimes the desire or the ability to stick to something where you're beating your head against the wall, right? Definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing, expecting different results. But to that point, and in my own experience, as you can imagine, if you literally have 10,000 papers that suggest that what you're saying is bunk, you need to really have the data behind it. So you have to be willing to take the slings and arrows of the people that you're discussing things with and turn them into your strength, right? So someone critiques your work in 10 different ways, go and do those experiments and answer the question and bring back the data set. And it's not to say I told you so, but it's rather to say, okay, I've addressed your concerns. Mm-hmm. You know, what are your other questions, right? So actively seek the detraction of others, if you will, because that will just make you stronger and build your story.
When I think about the success of people that I've hired over the years, I think the common trait that is shared by those who succeed the most is that they have a mastery over a particular subject or area of science. They're the go-to person on a particular question or technical area. This runs a little counter to, I think, some of the educational trends that I see currently when I see resumes come in for hiring, which is, I've got a master's in biotechnology and I've got a sprinkling of coursework in all these different areas. And so I have this broad stroke type of familiarity with biotechnology. Well, what I look for is mastery. Have they delivered in a particular area? You know, what's their publication record? Do they know cold a particular topic that I'm interested in hiring on?
Yeah, I would say a willingness to learn. It was pointed out to me during Matthias's talk that I was listening very intently to his comments about leadership, because at every stage of your career, you need to continue to learn, and a willingness to learn also fits in well with the ability to adapt to this accelerating world. And I find that even though I'm considered a mid-career person, it's constantly learning, whether it's about a new scientific topic or how to troubleshoot an administrative problem.
Yeah, for sure.
I would sort of add there, I have a name for the stick-to-itiveness that we always coached each other on, being politely persistent, of just going after it and never giving up, pushing, especially if it's a sale or something that you're involved in along those lines. But I would kind of add that being passionate about what you do, hopefully that comes from the fact that you actually love what you do. You found something that you like, and that passion comes out of you, whether you just intuitively, it just exudes from you naturally because you really do enjoy it. But I think probably the most important skill that I've seen on the teams that I've worked with is how well we work with each other. Can that team come together? Can people come together where we can share ideas? And whenever I've seen an idea for the first time in a meeting of any sort, it never gets delivered that way. We ran it what we called up the idea elevator, where everybody would opine on it in one way, shape, or form, and it would modify and change until it got to a particular point. And how well you work with people and don't get too, are willing to let those modifications happen and not that invented here syndrome. Let that kind of go away and let those ideas percolate to the point where, because you need many perspectives, all the different talents that people bring to the table, people with marketing backgrounds versus the science backgrounds versus, a customer's perspective. You need all that to come together before you can figure out really how something is going to be successful.
And I think there was a question before about the anti-disciplinary aspect of our education. In my opinion, I don't think you're necessarily going to get that at your stage and being in graduate school. The anti-disciplinary piece is, as you're saying, when you're collaborating with others, you're actually learning what they're saying, right? And as the moderator had said, throw up your hand when you have something on the top of your head. The ability to speak out like I just did, right? I had something to say. So, coach that in yourself. Be willing to say, hey, wait a minute, I don't get what you're saying. From a marketing perspective, what do I care when I'm dealing with a molecule targeting a particular pathway in a completely irrelevant cell line? What do I care about a market perspective? Well, it's a chance to learn, right? It's a chance to then project yourself forward in terms of what that's going to look like down the road.
Thanks, John. So John is giving you permission again to just absolutely go for it. Now, one of the things that's interesting to me from listening to each of you is that we talked about traits which suggest there's a certain commonality amongst great leaders. But on the other hand, we have 100 leaders of tomorrow, each of them different. So how do you sort of square that circle between these are the traits, but this is the individual and what they bring to the table versus just copy-pasting from others? I'm curious from any
So
of you.
I have a problem with Matthias's presentation. No offense, I don't know if he's still in the room, but Steve Jobs is not necessarily the archetype of a leader. I would not necessarily say you should try to mimic his behaviors.
Yeah.
Now, he has a certain genius. He has a certain charisma that helped him with his unique skill set to guide an organization. But I wouldn't look at any one particular person as being that person that I want to be. I love that he referenced Michael Jordan, right? I sort of anticipated, Bastian Steinschweiger or Lionel Messi from a German, right? But he referenced Michael Jordan. He was not particularly well liked by his teammates,
Yes.
not particularly well liked by his coaches, but he was an outstanding individual who made others around him better by complementary skill sets. So I think you have to be very careful not to say, that's the one person, I want to be like her, I want to be like him, because you have unique talents, skills, and abilities that you want to bring your passion and allow to flourish.
No, absolutely. And I can see Matthias is up there in the corner as well. I mean, I think part of
He's allowed to respond.
part of the discussion, just to recap, is the notion of, are there common traits and therefore you can go and copy those individuals versus you yourself finding your own voice as a leader. And I think, and I will get permission and he'll tell me later whether I speak for Matthias as well, which is, I think that's very much at least the way we would perceive it. It sounds a little bit, Brooks, that's what you're saying as well, which is, you find your own path but built on learning from others, and you take what is helpful to you but is part of your own tailor-made leadership journey. And we're going to be spending, I think, we've already had a terrific conversation, and we're still going, and we've got more of the afternoon to think about.
If I think about my supervisors over my career and who were the best leaders, the ones who I never was able to functionally respond to or enjoy working for, it was all about them. It was all about their team, how they could help the leader. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the supervisors that I enjoyed working for most and who enabled me to grow, it was how can the leader help the team and bring it forward as a team. And it was just completely opposite, whether it was egocentric as a leader or team-centric as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add to that. And we used to, with my teams, we would call that servant leadership.
Yes.
We really tried to I tried to coach all my executives and my managers that our job is to make the people that work with you successful. So that, figure out what their obstacles are, and your job is to help knock them down. But I would go back relative to the positions here. If you've got a passion about something, and you are going to step up and be a leader, and you will be if that passion is just coming out of you, you'll surround yourself with people that have other skills. Take time to be cognizant of your own strengths and weaknesses, and their strengths and weaknesses. And if you can get in a room and close the door and share those strengths and weaknesses with each other, you can get to the point where your team, the team you're working with, can call you out with that door closed and say, look, you're not the best guy, Dan, to go talk to that customer. We're going to send Marty because you and that customer are going to be oil and water. So.
That requires a lot of comfort and honesty. And oftentimes, no one has that. How do you get there to build that trust? To build that
Well, I can tell you how to do it if you're the CEO, because I've been the CEO. But if you're if you're a regular member of the team, I would imagine it would be much harder. But as the CEO, and is the case now, as I run around the halls of Hopkins, I know who the dumbest guy in the room is. I look in the mirror, and that's the guy. So it's easy for me to be able to say, look, I need your strengths, and I need, and let's figure out what they are. And let's put you in a position of success. And let's close that door, and let's build a team where we're honest with each other, and we know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and let's try to amplify your strengths. And one of the things that I'd gone through, because early on we were like, oh, we're going to fix our weaknesses, we're going to fix our weaknesses. And then I heard a talk from an Olympian who said, why is one particular Olympian, I forget her name, the recent retired from the women's team, why was she so successful? And we had a local Olympian who never really played with her, was on the team but never really played. And she said she spent her whole career improving her strengths to make her exceptional in that area, and then had other people around them to help with the weaknesses, as opposed to I spent my whole career trying to fix all my weaknesses. And those are hard conversations to have, but I think when you're building your team, and team building goes on all the time, you should be, it takes a team at the executive level, at any level, in any research project even. And if you can close those doors and have those moments where you say, look, let's be honest with each other here, and it's okay. It's okay to have weaknesses.
Yeah, and I just want to call out something that I think is so important, which is you've just, to paraphrase, talked about the concept of strengths-based leadership, yes, where you work from that rather than work from weakness. There's a huge body of evidence that shows that is indeed successful, not just for that athlete, but is indeed what breeds success. We see it time and time again. So we also want to sort of think about that through the afternoon, and we'll do that. But sorry, I think
Yeah, I just wanted to address your question
you.
from talking about a research group in academia. So at a university, there are a few places where there's as much of a power differential as, say, an investigator who runs the lab, or the PI, principal investigator, and the student. Because the entire future of the student depends on the recommendation of the investigator in addition to their publications. And so one of the things that I found very helpful is in our annual meetings that I have with each of the trainees is that there's an opportunity to share with them what I think they could improve on. But I certainly have written down questions of, what are my strengths, or not what are my strengths, but how might I improve and what can I do to help you? So just even in asking that question, it helps to sort of set up a culture of environment where you can, if you're willing to accept criticism, and of course, how you respond to those criticisms is key. But yeah, that's how I found effective.
I mean, there are little practices that I think a leader can exert to get those conversations in the closed door room. Self-deprecating humor helps. Inviting people to ask questions, or reflect when people look to you for the answer, reflect it back to maybe somebody else in the team to answer the question who has more domain experience or domain knowledge in a particular question. Make them the expert, not necessarily yourself the expert.
I think there's one thing I'd like to add. So you brought up the point, I forget, you actually brought up the point with regard to Steve Jobs. Half of my graduating class actually ended up working at Apple, and so I have lots of anecdotal stories about Steve Jobs. And there's a commonality here, which I don't think is actually a terribly a nice commonality, but it is, I think, a common trait with many successful CEO, leaders, what have you. And that is, you mentioned that Michael Jordan wasn't particularly liked by his teammates and his coaches. Steve Jobs wasn't particularly liked by the people that reported to him. He did some pretty inflammatory, unpleasant things, like when the first iPhone was brought in, the first mock-up, he had explicitly stated to the engineers that he needed, one button. The first one came in with, 10 buttons. And he literally threw it across the room. And he said, that is not what I told you guys. And so they all filed out, and somewhat abashedly, and then went and built what we now have as the iPhone. And I think one of the things that we really don't learn as scientists, because the predisposition to go into a laboratory and start investigating things, by yourself, et cetera, I think there's a certain call for a number of us that we aren't necessarily have a high emotional IQ. Right? It's something we can learn, we can develop that, et cetera, but it isn't necessarily something that we have when we enter grad school. And the point is that we need to be willing to not be the nice person. There are times when you need to make very difficult decisions. You need to fire people, you need to cancel a program, you need to change course, you need to pivot. And people, we all become very emotionally invested in the things that we do. We don't really distinguish our work from our personality oftentimes. And so in making that pivot, sometimes you really have to pry people's fingers off of what they're doing, what they're invested in, to for business reasons, for utilization of resources in a more effective way, to move to something that is better for the company as a whole. And that's not easy, right? You need to be a person that can look in the mirror and say, okay, I'm going to be not a terribly good person today. I'm going to do the best I can at delivering the message, but no one's going to respond well to the message that I have to deliver. So I think that's a component of our emotional IQ that we really need to seriously think about. And I'm not saying to go be a jerk all the time. That's not the point, right? It's a piece that you need to build.
And I think it actually touches on something quite nicely, John, which I wanted to raise with the panel as well, which is this notion of the scientist walks into the world of business. Mm-hmm. And not that everything you've described doesn't apply in the world of pure science, but when applied in the business environment, what are some of the things that you have learned and some of the reflections that you have, all of you, that you would share with the group in terms of, what is it about that environment that can be very helpful for the scientists to understand, no matter where they decide to take it?
I would start out a little bit with, thinking in terms of science, research, engineering, and then business and running a business, and using the McKinsey model of three things. A business, if you really fundamentally look at what it takes to start a business, you need a problem, then you need a solution to that problem, number two, and then number three, you need to deliver and support that solution into the market, into some customer base. And I would venture to say I quite often see research on the side of finding a problem, finding a solution to the problem, and then stopping. and
We're very good at stopping.
I had a nice conversation during lunch earlier with some folks here on translation and commercialization and how that is changing our culture today, both in the universities as well as through a variety of research. And I think, the National Science Foundation here in the States puts billions out in research dollars, and they did a study a few years ago looking at what have they gotten for those billions that they put out for many decades, and turns out they've got a lot of publications and not a lot of translated commercialized research, and so they're changing. So I think they, as well as I think what I learned at lunch by talking to some folks, is that this younger generation is much more translational, if you bear, much more doing those thought experiments of what will this research mean, how will it be commercialized, how will it be used by people, as opposed to stopping And I don't know if it's old school academic mentality, if it's, whatever the culture was before. I think it's changing here in the States, and I think you can all assess from wherever you're from. And we spoke to some folks who culturally in their countries were not seeing that shift as quickly as maybe we are here. But I think we all have to realize that there needs to be an end in mind with that research. And as researchers, you need to do your own thought experiments about what this research might eventually lead to, because it could change. There's and you need to collaborate with other people to understand what that change may be. There's the old Black and Decker story, being from up in the Baltimore area, where a bunch of the research engineers wanted to build a new drill, and they came to the meeting and said, we're going to come up with a 3/4 horsepower drill. It's got way more torque. It's going to be just the world's greatest drill ever. And the marketing department looked at them and said, we don't need a new drill. Our customers don't want drills. Our customers want holes. And quite honestly, rather than give us a new high-powered drill, which was sort of coming from the researchers, they said, could you give us a drill without a cord? And things have changed. Now we have less powerful drills with less torque, but a lot more drills that don't have cords. So, think about how that might apply to the research that you're doing, and how it gets applied out into the world, what that may or may not mean. And that, to me, that was just a beautiful example of the idea elevator. It gets run up there, and you get the right ideas thrown together on it. So,
Dan is spot on here, in that one thing that I have to train new employees who come in from grad school or postdocs into our company, or any company I've been involved in, is what does the customer want? Who is going to pay for what you're doing? How is it adding financial value to a product or a technology? And I end up just harping on that probably for a good year in the employee's first year of work within a company, is just bringing home, how are you adding value to what we're doing, and who's going to buy it, and how are they going to pay for it?
I think sometimes in a startup environment, you're mentioning the scientists going to the business world. We talk about being able to pivot, being adaptable, et cetera. I'll just give you an example. So started a company, brought in a CEO because I was a scientist, and he said, okay, great, you're going to do CMC. And so I'm a protein biochemist by training, and I thought CMC was critical micelle concentration, which is something that is completely unrelated to what he was telling me. What he was telling me was chemistry, manufacturing, controls. I was going to be running manufacturing. So I Googled it, right? Like, what the hell is CMC? And so I find critical micelle, and under that I find chemistry, manufacturing, controls. And I go, that's what I'm going to be doing. Okay, now what do I do? Right? Because I didn't know. I'd never manufactured anything in my life. Turns out I sort of had the rudimentary skill set to understand how to purify a protein and make it and all that stuff. But you need to be willing to ramp very quickly in things that you know almost nothing about. And I appreciate hiring people in that have particular skill sets. That's awesome. Sometimes you are the person that has to make it happen. And being able to do that quickly, you are trained not so much in doing your PhDs and your postdoc. You're not so much trained in terms of interrogating a particular pathway. What they're trying to do is to train your brain, right? One of the primary assets to Matthias's, kind of ability to be a good leader is, how to think, how to structure a problem. How do I approach this effectively, efficiently, and quickly? And then, how do I come back and make sure that I'm not really screwing up? Right? And that's where you have to elevator. I would go to postdocs that had been with me for years that I brought into the company, and I said, guys, I don't know. First of all, I don't know what I'm doing, and second, maybe one, like your wife or your husband's going to say, no, honey, you're fine. Really, really solicit that, right? Because it'll make you do things faster, make you learn faster.
Yeah, on that particular note, I guess, and that's sort of a follow-up to where we were a little while ago, is that, on that leadership side, when one of the easiest ways to break down the walls of communication so that you can have those open dialogues as the leader is to confess. to approach one of the people that work for you. And the reason I hired you is because you're smarter than me, and I don't know this, and can you please advise me? And that immediately breaks down the wall. And let them know they have strengths that you don't have, and that you need their advice and guidance. And that can begin that particular process.
Yeah, and just realize that 30 seconds after that person walks out of your office, the whole company is going to be like, "Wow, I didn't know that." Oh my gosh, right?
And I mean, one of the concepts I think that we're touching on here is what some people would term learning agility. So it's the mastery of a discipline, which I know many of you are very, very deep in, and I think it was some of the questioning before. But that ability and openness to pivot to other things and be able to learn quickly, fail quickly, but learn quickly from that as well, is so important. And so I guess one of the other things that touches on is, for those of you that, and it's almost all of you that have been involved in industry or companies, I mean, what are the types of things that you're looking for from the scientist that walks in the door? And I'm going to short circuit to say, I assume it's deep content expertise and excellence in that area, but what else?
Willingness to learn, willingness to fail quickly, a willingness to, parallel track, right? One of the things that we don't often do in science is we're very kind of monolithic in terms of how we ask a question, and it's a reiterative cycle. So if A, then B or C. If B, then D or E. In a startup environment, you can't do that. You need to be parallel tracking multiple things at once. And frankly, I have my people doing it at MedImmune in the sense of, don't shortcut your own success by asking a linear series of questions, right? We can all come up with hypotheses around a particular question that are potentially antithetical to each other. Test them at the same time, right? It does make you have to work harder. But at the end of the day, you're more efficient because you're getting to an answer more quickly.
I don't have that much industry experience, but coming from academia, I think I'd be interested in people's opinions. Is that it would be teamwork would be one thing that would be a skill that I don't think we necessarily do a good job of preparing people for, but I'd appreciate if you think that's true. I have heard the concern that was mentioned in the last group about how you have to sort of untrain people from this very focused on the individual performance, and it can take, I've heard, as long as 5 years to try to sort of reset that.
Yeah, I think teamwork skills are absolutely critical, in all of my companies. And I think it was mentioned in the panel earlier today, I thought were some excellent things that should be brought to this panel, which is, project management skills, leadership skills, negotiation skills. In all of my companies, I hired Dale Carnegie to come in and to help break down some of those walls, where we did Dale Carnegie classes with people just to help do team building, just to help people break down their own barriers of communications amongst each other so that they could function better together as teams. And the rave reviews I would get, from the feedback we would get from the teams of people and the employees over the years of just being able to have those. And then likewise, even how they take those skills home and help them in their regular lives. We're grateful. But I don't know anything today that is done solely. It's a team. I don't know, golf, tennis, whatever, but not in this world. Your idea is not getting to market without the help of a lot of people. So how well you work with them, how you bring those skills and build those skills, build some project management skills, read on negotiation and negotiating techniques and other leadership, soft leadership skills and things along those lines, so you can build that capability into yourself. I think would go a long way.
In addition to the mastery, having a flexible mind, teamwork abilities, we always look for communication skills. Can we put that person up in front of a customer or a collaboration group, and can they explain why they're doing a problem, what they're doing, and what the conclusions were of the results? And you'd be surprised how many times in an interview situation a candidate cannot do that. And those are the candidates who do not get the job, at least in my experience. So crisp presentation skills, have a structure to your story, have a story when you give a talk. It's not just laying out the facts in a dry way. You want to tell a story of what compelled you to do something, how you went about it, and then what your interpretation of those results is, and why you're excited about that, and where would you take it next?
So in a sense, I actually have a question that follows up on this, and it's, I guess, for Brooks and for Peter somewhat, which is, what's the role of education in all of this? What's the role of education in being able to set up the leaders that we have in this room and the ones that aren't in this room in a world of bio-innovation, greater entrepreneurialism, the test bed of commercialization, which takes you beyond just identifying problem, identifying solution, and then stopping? Curious to get your thoughts, Brooks, Peter, and then...
I don't want to sound like I'm selling Georgetown, but I will. Some of my very best executive MBA students have been scientists or engineers. Mm-hmm. They come with a problem-solving mindset, and whether that's a soft skill class like learning about negotiations or communications, they're able to master the finance piece and understand the accounting, because the language of Wall Street is largely a financial language. And if you want to raise money, you've got to be able to speak that language. It's a distinct or different language, but it's learnable, it's knowable. And so 7, 8 years out, you would be eligible and prepared to come back and be involved in an executive MBA program. And if not a program, maybe some classes that will help complement your scientific side. I think that that's an investment in your future. I've published 2 papers on the return on those investments, and the executive MBA at a top 25 school has a payback period of 18 months, meaning you come in at one starting salary, you get the education, and you come out making 60, 75% more than you made going in, and you're able to accelerate that.
I would like to just put a little context on that, in the sense that, you know, if we're talking about what our expectations are of education and what your expectations are of your current educational institution, I think you want to step back and realize that your education and the skills that you're going to build for yourself are your responsibility. And you've called upon one educational institution, and you've signed up for a curriculum that is going to give you a certain set of skills. But then as you step back and get on that balcony as the CEO of your own life, are those all the skills that you need to be, to achieve what you want to achieve in life? Or do you need to build other skills and get them in other ways, which, similarly go back and, enter an MBA program or do a number of self-studies in other different areas? I think that, I heard some of the conversation earlier where we were expecting our curriculums to change drastically to add all these things. Well, maybe not. I mean, they're trying to fit a lot in a short period. I've never known an education program that wasn't trying to overwhelm you with stuff in a very short period of time. Yeah. And now you're asking them to add all these other things, and things that go along with it. I would just sort of frame it a little bit, step back and say, your responsibility. We all have our own responsibility for the skills we want to develop over time.
I think that's exactly right. And at Hopkins, and across the United States, universities are struggling with this. What is their role? Given that we're trying to limit the amount of time that people are in school, given that it takes a lot of just physical effort to solve a problem, given that we don't have the expertise to deliver a lot of these things. So I've been lucky enough to experience a progression of this, which I think is improving, and where when I was a PhD student, no one taught you anything. You just had to look at what was happening around you and figure it out. My PhD advisor, I handed him a draft manuscript, and he said, "This is absolutely terrible." And I said, "Okay, well," I said, "How am I supposed to learn how to write?" He said, "You're just supposed to know." And he said, no, you just read papers and you understand how you do it. And he outlined it in like 2 minutes. And he basically in 2 minutes taught me how to do it, but had failed to actually tell me before. I'd wasted a month.
How far into your PhD was that?
Yeah, and then I think we decided we needed to teach people how to be good academics and run a laboratory. And so we sort of got to that point. So I think we're good at teaching communication skills, some leadership skills. And now we're moving in an area where we're trying to identify these common professional skills that would be applicable to many different careers. And I think that's a good place because then everyone will benefit from those. But to your point, you have to understand what it is you want to do, and then fill out, round out what that is. So I think at Hopkins we try to provide a lot of opportunities, but it's up to the individual to really select how those fill their gaps.
Got it. And I thank you. And I think there was a question down here.
One comment or one theme that has been in all of your comments is the ability to self-reflect. It seems to be very important as a leader, or even assessing where you're at currently in your graduate studies. And I know personally that I try to self-reflect, but sometimes I forget to do it, or I get caught up in a lot of stuff and I don't do it. How do you guys build that into your daily lives as leaders, CEOs, professors, and how do you make sure you continue to do it throughout your careers?
If I could just give you a device. So if you were to take my MBA class in leadership, we would start with, who are you today? And what formative experiences have you had that developed your personality and your knowledge and your skills? But who are you today? And then let you dream. Who do you want to be in the future? 30 years from today, you're going to be at this podium speaking to our current students as our alum of the year. What are the accomplishments? What will you be known for? What difference will you have made? And then you reverse engineer that. You say, okay, this is where I am, this is where I want to be. What are the systematic steps I can take? Whether it's a class, whether it's a different type of work experience, I need to develop different skill sets. What are the different ways that I can develop those knowledge, skills, abilities, etc., requisite to be that kind of alum of the year that I want to be 30 years from now? And that personal leadership plan, though not perfect, can sort of guide choices when they present.
I was going to just say, with our students, I would recommend, and when you're starting off in your career, just an individual development plan. And there are a number of different instruments like that, but it motivates a lot of the same questions and gets you thinking about it. And personally, setting short-term goals, I've never been able to work out that far. But I know when I sat down as assistant professor, I had a 5-year goal, and then I had another 5-year goal, and then at one day I thought, I don't even have a 5-year goal, and that's when I knew I needed to sort of step back and reassess.
You often having a group that you can rely on. I mean, at least in my own job, I have a board of directors that causes me to self-reflect quite a bit, and on a daily basis almost. But for those of us who maybe aren't as planning to say, I want to be this place in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, but end up in a situation where you have to acquire some type of skill, just having that sense that, okay, I am in uncomfortable territory. I don't have a natural inclination or instinct about how to do something. And if you start to feel that you don't have that natural instinct of how to do something, that's the time, okay, you better go get some skills and learn this new dimension on your job.
I would sort of say, if I reflect on the earlier part of my career when I needed to build a lot of skills in a hurry, I'd computer science from Michigan, then I did computer science at Hopkins, and then I went and did the Harvard Business School, and still did not have the skills that I need. I would say one of the things that would be a specific answer for you to take a look at, because I always felt I was contracting somebody to help me get to where I wanted to go. In that particular case, I think the most impactful thing on my life has been the Stephen Covey book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I lived and breathed that for a decade, and it just trained me to certain things of how I planned my time. Your time is your most valuable resource, and that gave me some skills that forced me to plan my time and to think ahead, to think about growing myself, or growing the people around me, growing my company, growing my family in balance, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say the specific recommendation I would give you is perhaps take a look at something like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dan. So I think we've had a couple of questions, but a couple of questions is not enough. We want to have more. So I'm about to open it up for that. But we've already got the first one up there. But before we go to questions from all of you, just one last piece of advice for our leaders of tomorrow, and we'll just go around our panel. And basically it comes down to this, I think. these are our future leaders. Many of them will end up, and we hope, in a successful enterprise, most likely one that's related to the sciences, either big or small. What would be your piece of advice to them as they think about their journey to success in these types of enterprises? John?
So I think it's really simple. I have 3 kids, and so it's the same advice I give to my kids. When they ask me, should I or should I not do something? And the answer is, I have no idea, it's your life. So, no. And the second piece of that is, I have found that the way you learn something is by learning what you don't want to do. So 90% of life is figuring out what you don't want to do, right? And hopefully as you get older, then that percentage changes, because you're accumulating the things that either bring you success in terms of habits, bring you success in terms of happiness, if that's important to you, things like that. So it's, you know, you're at an age where there is no failure, right? Go and do. You want to figure out what investment banking's like? Go work in an investment banking place, see if you like it. If you hate it, pivot, go to the next, right? Learn what you don't like, and you guys will know very quickly. You walk in the door and you'll go, wow, this room is just full of people I can't stand. Go to the next, right? Figure out what you don't want to do, because that'll quintessentially bring down what it is that it brings you joy, happiness, fulfillment, and a good life.
Thank you.
I would just say keep doing what you're doing, because you're all here, which means, and you have many peers and colleagues who aren't here. So whatever's brought you today says something special about yourself, and I think you've all been taught how to acquire information and skills, and so I would, figure out what you want to do through these methods, but just keep doing it.
Yeah, regrettably, I'm probably going to just echo the same. I think that
it's the benefit of going early on a panel.
Softballs. I think we're kind of preaching to the choir here. If I think about this particular summit and the types of people that are attracted to it, is my number one piece of advice is take the initiative. Step up. Don't wait. Don't wait for anything to come to you. Go make it happen. And you all seem to be the crowd that seems to be already on that path. And so I would just kind of pat you on the back and say, keep doing it.
Right. One of the attributes I didn't learn until I was 40 years old, which I had learned much earlier, was the bumper sticker from the 60s, question authority. Mm-hmm. I had 2 instances in my career where I had, one was an interview in 1984 with a VP at Wyeth Ayers, and he said, proteins will never be drugs. He said, people want to take a pill. And I was all about monoclonal antibodies and wanted to get in that space. And I kind of took that in and said, okay, maybe that's the case. Well, obviously he was dead wrong. Had another senior director at Pfizer saying, kinase inhibitors will never be drugs. Only cytotoxics will kill cancer cells. And again, I kind of took a step back and didn't pursue what I innately knew was an area that deserved further investigation on my own part. So question authority. Don't take someone who is an authority's answer as gospel. Push back, interrogate.
So don't listen to anything we just said.
That's right.
Thank you. Brooks?
Raise your hand if you're from outside the United States. All right. So tonight at 9 o'clock on ABC, it's the 3rd game of the National Basketball Association Finals. Right? This is relevant. All right, stick with me for just a minute. Cleveland is led by LeBron James, who just passed Michael Jordan as the all-time playoff leader in points. So he's now making at least a case for one of the greatest, if not the greatest, players of all time. So now there's a collection of individuals who play extremely well together on Golden State's team. And what you'll see is the difference between an absolutely outstanding talent and a collection of individuals playing well together, exploiting their strengths, and don't want to make a prediction about any single game, but Golden State will win this. And just try to look here now at the difference between an excellent individual surrounded by a couple of others and a team that really plays in a well-orchestrated building on one another's strengths, passing the ball, moving in a way that's unique and different. They're averaging the most possessions ever in the history of the finals. I mean, there are lots of metrics would say they're doing things differently, but they're doing it as a team. And I think that's one of the things I'm taking from the panel is you can't do this alone. The lone genius is not going to create the next or bring to market the next drug or opportunity. It's going to be done in the context of working with others effectively.
And Golden State is a venture-backed enterprise, by the way. Right? So if you think about where money's going, it's going to people being able to work together well.
Very nicely put. Terrific. Thank you. Indeed. But you have them for a bit longer. Now, there was a question up there. Go for it.
Again, thank you for an interesting discussion. Eugene Chenderov. I'm at Johns Hopkins. I'm one of the oncology fellows and also have a small startup company. One of the things you've all been alluding to some degree is the idea that the world, and some of the previous talks, is changing so quickly that perhaps the traditional education format doesn't necessarily give you the skills for a lifelong career, so you need to evolve. I believe it's Liz Wiseman who published a book called Multipliers, and it's about leaders who have effects, skills in a sense that enable their organizations to thrive versus leaders who are diminishers and actually dampen down the ability of their organization to survive. And what are your thoughts about that sort of idea of being a lifelong learner in the setting of also being a lifelong multiplier?
Well, I guess I would say that lifelong, yeah, that's kind of a little bit of a no-brainer. I just think in terms of my career, my first company, Rapid System Solutions, I told you a little bit about, we were up against the old school, software development life cycle where people would spend 2 to 3 years planning and then 2 to 3 years building, and 6 to 10 years they would field a software system. And at Rapid, we would do, we'd launch a working prototype in 6 months, and then we would get user feedback to build that next version of the application. And that was sort of the early 90s competing against the late 80s. And I sold that company in 96. And then in 98, I took a company public, a $180 billion company public that was doing all internet software development with none of the tools that I had done. And in a matter of 10 years, 2 years, the technology had so completely changed. We used to make fun of the COBOL programmers and the big iron guys in the 70s and 80s, and then by the end of the 90s, I felt like a COBOL programmer. It was just that bad. Things had changed so fast, so you really don't have a choice. You have your industry is going to change so fast. The way you do things, the way things are developed, because people are not only trying to solve the problem that you're trying to solve and you're competing against them, but people are competing to change the way you solve the problems you solve today. And that just pulls a rug right out from underneath you. So yeah, you have to be on top of it. There's just no two ways about it.
I'll address the part of your question that challenged whether the traditional form of education or something around that is still applicable. And I think the way in which we used to deliver facts, and at least in the biological sciences, we thought we could deliver all known facts. When I look at the bookshelf and see my textbooks from undergraduate and graduate, there's one volume of something that's maybe 200 pages. Now you don't make books that have all the information anymore. So I think we need to step back from that approach and focus more on teaching first principles. I think PhD education overall is about practicing and gaining these habits, and then you can take what you learn there and apply it to many different problems. I think that is still a very solid structure, but the front end of it and whether we need to have so much information-based courses, I think is a legitimate question, and we're working to change that at Hopkins in many ways, focusing more on problem-solving exercises and referencing material rather than memorizing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let me take just the second part of that, which is Liz Wiseman's book about multipliers. The idea of how do you bring out the best in other people, and sometimes that's by provoking them, sometimes that's by supporting them. So the idea that you can systematically elevate the sort of the performance of your team doesn't necessarily mean you put your arm around everyone. Yep. Everyone needs something different, and you need to understand every employee is different, or every member of your team is different. Some of them need a kick in the butt, and some of them need a shoulder to cry on. And you've got, as a leader, to figure out what it is that they need to elevate their game.
And it actually requires, I think, a significant amount from the leader to be sufficiently tuned in to each member of their team and to be that chameleon that can do all the pieces that need to be done. So in terms of not the force multiplier, but the force, inhibitor, my previous company, we ran into that where the prevailing mentality was to act like we were all on the front line and we were being shot at, and if we didn't all collectively get our stuff together, we were going to be killed by our CEO. And that kind of environment, I think, works in the short term, but it doesn't work in the long term. And what happens then is that actually spreads from the company to your negotiations on term sheets for merger and acquisition, all these types of things. And that entity then starts to take on a life of its own, which is devaluing, right? So independent of the clinical data, in our particular case, we had spectacular clinical results, but nobody wanted to work with that company any longer. Right, so that's a really quintessential component of being a leader. To be a leader, you really need to step up. You need to be the person that is, we talked about passion for a project, et cetera. When you become a CEO, you just don't drop your passion, right? Your passion now becomes that new egg that you're growing, and all of the components in that egg. You need to take that on. In my opinion, you need to take it on.
It's a great example, John, I think, of the IQ, EQ challenge and what can bring people undone or make them successful. Yes, question down the front. So.
Hi, Espenshade, Global Biotech Revolution. So I've asked a question that's probably brewing in the event app, and it's been brewing in my head as this conversation's been going on. You look at the leaders of tomorrow here. They come from 39 nations. There's a 50-50 distribution of male to female. I'm going to do the ugly job of asking, why don't we see that represented in the leaders of today on the stage here? I mean, I know how much work the teams put in here to identify the best leaders to bring into a forum like this. And we struggle. We struggle to find a diverse range of people from different nationalities, from different sexes to come to this forum, because there's not that many examples. And we've been talking here about identifying key strengths. There's no one size fits all, but still in this industry in biotech, there is a one size at this stage. How do you find, as leaders of today in your organizations, in your teams, can you give us examples of how you've brought in this diversity of different types of thinking and skills into your teams? Sorry for the hard question.
No, great question. Thank
Be
you.
happy to attempt to answer that. First, in terms of nationality diversity, within an R&D organization, I'd say we had people from all continents, other than Antarctica, obviously, represented on our teams. And I think that cultural diversity definitely helped in having a high-powered and a team that delivered in a way that didn't deliver maybe the expected solution, but delivered something that was even better than the expected solution. And they pushed each other. They just brought different ways of thinking in. I think in terms of gender diversity, I've always tried to hire whoever was best. But you asked for a specific example. I hired a young woman straight out of UCSD once. Didn't do a postdoc, had a PhD. And it was clear that she not only had the ability to perform the science, she had the ability to represent the science in front of groups. So we gave her a program management position, actually to do a orphan disease drug discovery program on Huntington's disease. And she did such an exemplary job. I think that gave her the confidence to then go get a job at Exelixis, and then now she's a director at Genentech. And she's had a stellar career going forward. So I think it helps if you're, whoever you hire, to give them some role that is a level of confidence. And I think that will help to increase the diversity of people at the top levels. People just need an opportunity to shine, and they need an opportunity to grow their confidence.
I would say that I've been lucky in the sense that most all my companies have been very, very diverse in terms of the teams that I've had. But I still would sort of challenge the concept and take it to another level. You're looking at a panel of a bunch of older, almost all white guys, and that's obviously the result of something. And I don't know exactly what. I just think the problem still is not going away, because I'm probably coaching about 12 to 13 startup and or potential startups, and I think of those only 3 are led by women, where a woman has had the passion and taken that extra risk and step up. So I don't know if there's the CEO and below. That's a big step to jump into that CEO spot, to take that initial risk and to put everything on the line and is that leap, are all of our cultures still suffering in the sense that we're having a hard time getting women to take that particular jump into that particular role? Because I don't think it's going away. I can't just say that. I can't just sit here and say that this is going to be different 10 years from now because we've made so much progress. I'm not convinced of that, because I still see a chasm where I don't quite see the women stepping up to those high-risk roles on their own. I see them being pushed into it sometimes. I see people hiring into it sometimes, but I'm just not, I'm a small part of the world, but I still see it as a problem. And I don't know that I have an answer for it, but it's not going to go away as easily as I think we hoped that it would. I don't think 10 years from now we're looking at 50-50 up here. I wish we were, but I don't think that we are. I think we still have some cultural things that we need to change.
Peter?
I think that if you're an organization, you could do that, right? With anything, diversity has to be intentional and it has to be a goal of the organization. And then if you're failing at that goal, you have to identify what the barriers are. And so, in terms of getting different groups into science, this is true, that you have to identify barriers, whether it's something for, say, admissions to PhD programs by using GRE scores as a strict cutoff for a metric for something, which doesn't actually invite everybody who's talented into the applicant pool. So I think if that's your goal, you just have to attack it like any other problem.
I don't think the problem comes in the education side, perhaps, because especially in the biology discipline, I think there's probably sometimes an overrepresentation, just sticking to the topic of perhaps women, because you do see a lot of PhD students who are biology, but as you were highlighting, that them taking the leap into, or having the confidence, or taking the leap to a more leadership role. And the question comes down to, is that a problem culturally or for women to be taking that leap, or is that a problem where people are used to knowing the same network of people, so you're often looking for people like you to take over, or the sustainability of the organization? So I think this is sort of a chicken and egg sort of a question of later, as we develop, the leaders of tomorrow develop in our careers, where are these challenges actually factoring in for people to stand back and not take up the leadership roles?
I think it's a really good point in that with regard to biology. So I was sitting here thinking, wow, we're kind of white and old up here. And that's an issue, right? I come from California. My daughter is actually a hardcore feminist. And so I hear this all the time. And it's really affected my thinking in terms of how I look at the situation that I'm in. And so in my current role at MedImmune, Baisha is our CEO, which is fantastic. And it actually changes the total environment. And what I mean is, we just rolled out 10 by 25, so 10 cures by 2025. And I was interviewing somebody or being a part of an interview panel for someone in the translational sciences group, and she said, what does that mean to you that you have a woman that's a CEO? And I said, I think it actually means that we look at what we do completely differently. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, we're actually talking about curing. For a long time, and this isn't really the nicest thing to say, but pharma has been about treating people for the rest of their life, right? Because that's a monetizable kind of life cycle. Baisha challenged us to cure, right? You cure something, you're no longer treating that patient, right? They're cured, they're done, they're good to go. That's a fundamental shift in how we actually look at our jobs, and it makes us work a lot harder, and I'm glad for it. So in terms of my teams, one of the reasons I came to MedImmune as opposed to J&J and Bristol Myers and other places is that the teams I'm leading, they are 100%, 50-50, right? We have just as many women as men. We have just as many people. Actually, we only have 2 Americans in my group of 25, right? They're people from all over the world. And that's, we need to foster that. We need to be the ones. And I get your point about that shift into, being at some high level and then becoming a CEO. But you know what? If you look at the upper management at MedImmune, they're mostly women. And they will take the next step to becoming CEOs. And I'm not, not a hurrah, moment here, but that needs to happen. And it will happen. And I actually somewhat disagree. I think that in 10 or 15 years, you will see a completely different set of faces up here. And we're already seeing it in one particular case at MedImmune. When you look at the panel of people that addresses our town halls, it's 50-50, right? And it's people from all over the world.
It does take time because, at least my job at Invitrogen, where we had a larger enough sampling size of different leaders, business unit leaders, which there were about 20 business units. It was all male when I was there in kind of the mid-2000s, but by the time I left in 2011, there were now women starting to take roles as business unit leaders. And then they would become then the division leaders and the CEOs, whether it was within Life Technologies or Thermo Fisher or other companies. So you see it happening, but yeah, it's a gradual evolution.
It's glacial. Yeah, it's slow.
Yeah, and I think, just some reflections from me. So the good news is that after the break, you're going to see that flip completely, so that everybody from down the front is no longer going to be male speaking and presenting, and that's obviously a good thing. I think the other aspect around this is, and I think you said very well, Ipshita, that people sort of hire people that look like themselves. The evidence is there for that. So when you use machine learning to actually screen through CVs, you get a very different outcome to when it's done by people. And we know that time and time again. We also know, and I would encourage you all to think about it in the organizations that you are a part of, the whole concept of unconscious bias. And I think many down the front will be familiar with that. So this is where, for example, a female candidate might be seen as emotional, a male candidate is seen as passionate, someone might be shrill, another person is assertive. These are the types of things we need to break through. It's not just simply eyeballing people in terms of what they look like. And there is a huge body of evidence now, and again, we're among scientists, which is, if you look at the metric of something like a total return to shareholders, companies that have greater diversity when you control for everything else, be it gender, be it race, be it sexual orientation, perform better. And I think we heard from people down the front that they see evidence of that even anecdotally. So yes, the front doesn't reflect the room, but we're having a terrific conversation. I'm glad you asked the question, and I think we're making great strides. I think I'm probably with John on that one. There were more questions though. And I think we've got time for one or two more.
Hello, my name is John Gertz. I'm a PhD candidate in bioengineering at the University of Maryland, College Park. So what would you guys say towards the barriers to horizontal mobility and diagonal mobility within this kind of sphere of industry, academia, startup, government? There's kind of the perception, correctly or not, that if you do a startup, then you're never going to get back into academia. If you go into academia, you get a lab, you get entrenched, people depend on you, you'll never have time to leave and do a startup or join industry. So what would you guys say towards, I guess, the validity of that perception, and if it is true, what can be done to fix it?
Well, if I'm going to start, I'm going to say there's no validity to it. I haven't seen it.
Thank you. Others?
I think it's
Drop the mic.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
I think it's certainly, as someone in academia and who's spent all my time there, you certainly can have opportunities to start your own companies. I think you can certainly leave and go to industry. I know MedImmune's head of cardiovascular research just left academia after a long, successful career there, and now is leading the group there. I think how easily you can come back from pharma into academia depends on the institution. So that very much is cultural.
So as an example, Stanford has people in and out all the time.
For instance, Hopkins doesn't as much, right? I mean, and given that we all know that the pipeline's very full in terms of people who want those jobs, there's no incentive, at least in that culture, for them to change, right? It's a completely different world there.
But just if I may add, I think it actually behooves us as an industry that we start having people like the gents up here and the ladies in the future that go back into academia, because it then brings a skill set that you can look at preclinical data sets and say, you know what, that has legs. That is something that we should get IP on, that we should start figuring out how to manufacture, and we should spin that out as a company. I think that's really crucial. And I think, while biotech, so when I was in the new grad rather a long time ago, my freshman dinner, we had one of the founders of Core Therapeutics come in and talk to us. And biotechnology was actually offered as a degree at the institution I was at, right? That was a long time ago. But the point being that we're now becoming sufficiently mature as an industry, as a collection, as an ecosystem, that we can actually start having more of those kind of cyclic in and out, right? So I was in big companies, I went to startups, I'm back at a big company, I'm more than likely going to go to a startup, but I'll go back, right? So it's, and eventually I do actually want to go back into academia, right? Not from a comfort zone perspective, but because there's so much there that we're not necessarily capitalizing on, and I think we can.
And maybe one of the things, not so much about going back and forth, but I think nationally what you're seeing is a lot closer collaboration between the two, so that we're trying to create an interface at which there's that interaction without people having to move themselves. I do want to give one plug for something that Hopkins is doing with MedImmune, which is this center I found that has now this joint PhD training program where you can have a faculty member that you train with at Hopkins, but you're also embedded with a research mentor at MedImmune. And actually, Inez Lam, who's one of our first 2 students, is in the audience here today, who's just joined that program. So that's an example of how, without actually having personnel, well, shared personnel and the student moving back and forth, but you can benefit from both environments.
One of the questions I get quite a bit is, how do I go from a scientific career to one on the more business side? How do I get into business development or intellectual property? And the way I've seen it for individuals who have made that transition, they get a job, often in R&D because that's what they're trained to do, but they work with the company that they're in to transition and learn the skill set with the company's support that allows them to take on a role in a different way. And I've always appreciated business development people, for instance, who have that scientific background so that they're not completely dependent on the scientists representing the work and the company's capabilities, and the fact that they get things right and not wrong and have to be corrected again.
And they don't bring you boneheaded ideas to review. It's great.
Thank you. Okay, maybe one last question and then we'll wrap it up.
Hi, my name is Olga. I'm from Indonesia. I'm a PhD student at the University of Cambridge. Thank you very much. It's been a very great discussion. So, related to the topic, which is success in the 21st century life science industry, I'd like to ask, sorry if this sounds very hypothetical, I'd like to ask, how to be, what's your personal experience? Try to be as personal as possible. How to stay resilient, whatever happens, and how to stay persistent to pursue your goals. Because you know that every day we face a lot of challenges, we face failures, and all of you already reach a state of successful in your reaching your goals in life. So yeah, do you work hard, play hard, or do you take 1 month break after 6 months, for example? So I want to know about your tips. Thank you.
How to stay resilient? It's a very important question and probably one of the big sort of themes of leadership. I'm also conscious that we're coming up to the break. So what I might suggest is if we just do a rapid turn from our panel. And this time we'll start with Brooks.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd say, excellent question. Have a sense of purpose outside of your work, whether that's contributing in the community or in your own home, but have a sense of purpose and identity outside of work as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Brooks.
As a type B individual, not a type A individual, I just try to establish a flow, and work and home and family and avocation kind of all blend together so that it's not trying to choose one or the other. It just kind of puts together in a flow, and then just follow that flow.
Thank you, Brian.
I would think that you sort of answered your own question in the sense that I think goal setting is really important, and personal goal setting for all aspects of your life, and always having the next goal. So no matter what accomplishment you've made, you set a new goal, and you're trying to grow yourself to that next level. And that's done a good job of keeping me motivated through my life.
Thank you.
I would say, as was mentioned before, you just need to know yourself very well, because that definition and that breakdown is different for every single person. So they'll be satisfied and fulfilled as best it suits them.
Yeah, what's your motivation, right? I mean, for me, 8 members of my family had died from cancer, so I kind of am lucky, right, in the sense that I have an excellent motivation every time I get up in the morning.
Thank you, John. Thank you. It feels like we've touched on some very big topics. I mean, just to quickly recap, the whole concept of the world of education and how that's preparing our future leaders, the fact that education will take you so far, but in a sense there's also the onus to self-educate. That was for me one big topic. The second was around the ongoing linkages, and in an ideal world, perhaps even that revolving door between science and the business community, business in many ways being the ultimate incubator and test lab for your ideas, so that there is a so what beyond just I found the solution. And then finally, the notion of what does it take to be a successful leader.